Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm speaking with sports psychologist Dr. Ben Freakley. Ben, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Great to be here.
Today we're not going to be unpacking a research paper for a change. We're going to be talking about sports psychology at the coalface, being a mental skills practitioner with athletes, with coaches. Ben and I are going to unpack a few ideas around what that looks like. But to get us started, Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a bit about your work.
Thanks, Dan. And again, really so pumped to be here. It was awesome meeting you out in LA and getting to do a little bit of work together out there. Yes, my name is Ben Freakley. I've been in sport as long as I can remember, played just about all of them growing up, but really got into soccer around 7, probably because my dad was a military man. We lived in the UK, we lived in Germany, traveled all over, so was exposed to non-traditional sports, especially here in the States. Um, Flash forward, played soccer through college, coached college soccer for more than a decade. And it was during that time that like you, Dan, I really got interested, passionate, curious about how do we develop the best mind-body connection and create peak performances. So started my sports psych journey in 2010, went all the way through a master's and doctoral level training in that. Don't call myself a sports psychologist, but do call myself a mental performance coach. And I've had the opportunity along the way to work in some amazing environments like the 75th Ranger Regiment and the Toronto Blue Jays, and more recently, having a chance to work with the MLS and the USL. So just really fascinated with how to get the best out of ourselves on a daily basis at an individual and team level. And if it's a conversation, a book, a paper, a class around that, you'll usually find me there.
Keen to explore your experiences as a coach. We have so many coaches listening in. Tell me a little bit about that emerging interest you had in mental skills, sports psychology when you were coaching. Did that interest happen prior to coaching? Did it happen all at once when you were coaching? Did it kind of emerge over time? Give us a sense of your experience there.
Well, I tell this story all the time. I think the defining moment was, I believe, 2008. I was the head men's soccer coach at Virginia Military Institute, and it's a small Division I school, and we were competing in the Big South Conference, and we were getting ready to play Coastal Carolina, and they have a exceptional program, exceptional coach, and a goal of mine that I was not quiet about was that we would deliver to the university the first ever victory over Coastal Carolina. Dan, that week, tactically, we could not have been better. And I really felt that we had a shared singular focus on what we were going to do. We had the advantage of playing at home. So they were having to make the long trip to us. And a lot of these variables that you would need to go into getting a victory were looking good. And then there we were, 60-ish minutes into the game, and we're up 2-0. Now, mind you, prior to this game, my interest in sports psychology had been growing, but this was the defining moment. That game ended 3-2, not in our favor. We had 6 yellow cards. We had 2 red cards. And if you would have had a camera on me during the game, it would have been a master class in somebody who had lost their way. And if any players of mine had been looking over to try and find a model of stability, they would not have seen it. I was talking out of both sides of my mouth. You know, you and I would classify that shift probably around loss aversion. I had probably shifted unknowingly from a motivation to achieve success, coaching out of task, coaching out of process, being in the moment, shifting to fear, and we can't lose this game. It got me tense. It got my players tense. And I know wholeheartedly that was my last straw that said, you need to learn how to do this better.
In psychology, we use this term locus of control. We talk a lot about attributions. So I attribute these circumstances on somebody else or others. I attribute this circumstance towards myself. In essence, I'm culpable here. These things were in my control, or these things were out of my control. So, locus of control, attribution. So, when you reflect back, would you say that that 3-2 loss was as a consequence of things that were, in essence, about you in many respects? You mentioned that you were tactically, you felt you had the team in a place to tactically compete. But when you reflect back, had you not prepared them well enough mentally? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. As much as I believed going in that we were ready, none of my talk at halftime, none of my preparedness on my own or with my assistants was around what will we do when we're 2-0 up with 20 minutes to go, with 15 minutes to go? What changes might we need to make? There was no real effort put in toward um, managing the game appropriately, or I would say even more significantly, managing myself. There was no amount of self-regulation going on in that moment. So yes, you absolutely captured it, and I do believe that with mental skills, and you and I talked about this a little bit when we were together out in LA. There's no one supporting the coaches. Had there been a sports psych, with me or around me, I think I could have been guided to a better place for my team. I would have been a better performer as a coach for my team on that day.
I jump onto social media and so often see whether it's tweets or messages on LinkedIn talking about players have to bring attitude, effort, and energy to training sessions. Players have to be coachable. Players have to be incredible teammates. And those messages seem to detract from the ownership a coach needs to have in terms of coaching these concepts, constructs, and important features of participation in sports. What's your thoughts on that? I
Mm.
just wonder sometimes if those messages dismiss the coaching influence or the influence a coach can have on these things.
Yeah, having been a coach, I felt like I wanted to coach all of those things. My supervisor, when I was doing my clinical work for school, said something that stays with me forever. We get better at what we practice. So as coaches, if we want to practice coaching attitude into our players, optimism into our players, if we want to coach work rate off the ball, I do believe, and you and I, know that change is not easy. But if those things are values of yours as a coach, if you believe in them, then you'll coach them. I'm working with a pro coach right now. Most of our conversations are around those types of qualities that you just identified and how he uh, praises, highlights, trains, encourages those behaviors in his training sessions.
Attitude, optimism, work rate, those types of qualities.
Intensity, even togetherness. Yes. Yeah.
And how is you as a mental skills practitioner how do you go about improving attitudes and developing optimism and injecting work rate into the environment, intensity, improving togetherness? Let's hone in on a few of these.
This is a great question. I think you could look at the quality of the team, for example, if you're trying to assess where they are on the stages of team dynamics, if they're in a performing stage, for example, I will often encourage coaches to raise the challenge level in training. What was good enough in terms of number of passes completed or time in possession or chances on goal, um, balls won back in the opponent's half, what we may have identified, from a process goal standpoint, 2 weeks earlier, we may say that's not good enough anymore. We may say we're performing well, so now it's time to level up. And so, what does this do? This might encourage a different intensity, higher levels of communication. Those are kind of top of mind things that I'll typically default to. My mind also, Dan, goes to um, just being, I think in our field, we have to be experts at asking the right questions and raising awareness. And I think a lot of these coaches, those qualities that you just mentioned, everybody would prioritize and say they want all of those things. But I think I'd maybe want to focus in even more and say which ones are the most important to you. And how would we know if we see that in training? That question of what does good look like? Um, and then maybe a third idea, just top of mind, is when we're doing video review, beyond highlighting the right tactical moments or the wrong tactical moments, if we see behaviors in game or in training that model that quality that we're looking for of intensity or optimism, maybe we see it in body language, maybe we hear it in a teammate in the way they talk to each other in an uncertain moment, that's where I'm stopping, rewinding, replaying, and saying that's it right there, more of that.
So it's very much a negotiation between you and a coach, or would you say it's completely coach driven?
My preference is that it would be coach driven and a collaboration. I think in the higher level environments that I've worked in. So first of all, I believe that a coach is already the team psychologist. I just want to make them a great one. I think that that's my goal going in, and my preference would be that it's going to be that coach's voice or the coaches' voices, and maybe I'm more behind the scenes and staying curious and asking questions, maybe helping shape up some of the messaging, but very rarely would I be out in front. Very rarely.
So you're predominantly working with and through coaches.
Yes.
And when you think about, you mentioned coach as psychologist. The coach, the first team coach, the head coach is the psychologist here, and you're trying to help them become a great psychologist. Obviously, we've mentioned words already, and you've unpacked it a little bit around process, increasing challenge level on the grass in activities. But when you think about a great coach as psychologist, or a coach as a great psychologist, what do you envision? What do you see? What pops into your mind?
Man, I love this question. So let's first start, they're clear on themselves. Let's start there before I go out into the larger ecosystem. Good understanding of who am I, my self awareness. Now I'm reaching back. Who led me well? Who coached me well? Who didn't? What do I value? Those types of things. Getting clear. And I think what I'm so encouraged by, Dan, is nowadays the level of coaches that I'm seeing doing this gives me great confidence that this next generation and wave of coaches is spending time working on these things. I think places like the FA and United States Soccer Federation are putting more of these types of modules into their coach education system. So I'm grateful for that. The second, I think a coach, even if they don't use the terminology, they they do things like promote a mastery environment. I read sometime you might even know him, but I had the chance to meet Gregor Townsend at a Leaders in Sport conference one time, and was just so appreciative of what I learned about his great by choice time that he had built into his training environments, where he had given complete autonomy to players and said, "Where in your game do you want to level up?" And instead of directing onto the players, get better at this, it was a more autonomy supportive aspect of the training environment. So even if coaches aren't using that language, and they don't need to, they're the sports psychologist, the sports psychologist and the coach would appreciate the need for autonomy. They would appreciate the need for mastery experiences and building those into their training schedules. They would be promoting relatedness. I mean, I've read your posts and appreciate them greatly on LinkedIn, where we talk about these real intimate connections with players, where coaches are genuinely going in curious, agendaless, and really trying to get to know the players. And then maybe the last one, just quickly, would be, I know we both appreciate Dr. Sakar's work on resilience. I think it's a coach that even at the highest level can strive for a facilitative environment, one that is both stretch and support, care and challenge, as opposed to a win at all cost transactional environment where maybe that worked in the past, but I think now we get the most out of the athlete and team when it's transformative and there's a relational component to it. So those are things that I have seen in coaches, and would say I'd love to see in coaches that would classify that the psychologist in them is alive and well.
That's really interesting. I want to reflect back what I've heard there. Three-pronged approach, and it's not to suggest that there's not going to be more, because obviously I've put you on the spot there and said, well, how would you go about this? But three very powerful things, which I completely agree on. And I love where you've started, clear on self, being self-aware. I'm a big believer that self-skills perhaps might not be the coolest sounding skills in coaching, right? But self skills are absolutely imperative. So self-aware, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. Secondly, developing a mastery environment, and you talked about Gregor Townsend, and for anybody listening in who's not necessarily up to speed with rugby, Gregor Townsend is the Scottish national rugby coach, an incredible coach, creating a mastery environment and being autonomy supportive. Gregor focused on asking his players what they wanted to work on, to develop. And then finally, resilience. And you mentioned Dr. Mustafa Sarkar there. Mustafa's been on the Sports Soap Show a few times. That facilitative environment, one that is high challenge, high support, or stretch and support, as you mentioned. So absolutely love all of that. And perhaps honing in on some of those, going back to clear on self and being self-aware. Self-awareness, are you speaking more to a coach's character, what they bring to the table, what helps and hinders them? Are you speaking more to domain-specific knowledge, a bit of both? Can you hone in a bit more on that self-awareness piece? And also, can you reflect upon when you have helped coaches build their self-awareness, how are you doing that? Are you doing that over a cup of coffee? Are you doing that on the pitch? Yeah, can you speak a bit to self-awareness?
I'll do my best. So I'll have to talk about my dad just for a second in doing this, Dan. He was a 37-year career in the military, and I'm extremely proud to talk about him. I get emotional talk about him because I love him so much. And he had a phenomenal career. He went to West Point, which is the premier leadership academy school in the United States, and retired as a 3-star general. And this is, we should probably get him on the Sports Psych show to talk about leading, in uncertain, decentralized environments. You and he could have a great chat. But I remember I asked him questions like this all the time, right? And I said to him one time, like, "Hey, Dad, what's most important for leaders? Self-awareness, right off the bat, like right off the bat." So, this is something that when you ask me about the coach, I think we have to start there. It makes me think about first, maybe things like intrapersonal skills. These might be, what psychological, psycho emotional skills do I have? Then secondly, interpersonal. I mean, I think if I couldn't pinpoint one thing, but I think something we put on the list that coaches struggle with is consistency in communication, keeping the vision in front of people, and how a long season and results threaten that shift in the message, which I think if you pull that back further, that could impact or impede or influence interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate and the ability to, if priorities are shifting, um, am I able to communicate that to the right people? Well, how do we get there? Um, I think we get there. Like, I love a SWOT analysis, and this wouldn't be anything formal, at least for me. But the way I like to work with coaches would, as I feel like the relationship and the trust is there, and if they want to go there, then let's start with strengths. Where are you elite? And this could be, tactically, I'm sharp. It could be, my ability to motivate in the dressing room is elite. I'm great at collaborating, empowering, whatever, right? So we would go with strengths, and then we follow that all the way through: weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then from there, I'm a big fan of a strengths-based approach. I think a lot of high performers, you've probably experienced this, they want to go straight to, I have to get better, get better, get better, get better. And while that's true, how do we not abandon the things that got us there in the first place and really work from that place of stability? And I think vulnerability, Dan, is a big piece of this. That in order to truly be self aware, I don't know if you've seen that Johari's window exercise about, known to self, known to others, but you got to work through that process. What do I know about me that others don't? What do I know about
Yep.
me that everybody else knows about? And what do I not know about that others do? And if you've got the courage to lean into that spot, I think that can be a real accelerator for coach growth, as long as they're coming from trusted, valuable sources. Maybe picking, if it's an elite level, is it picking some senior players that you're willing to get some feedback from? Certainly your staff. I felt like the most I ever grew as a coach is when I handed my assistant coach, not my athletic director, an evaluation form and said, "You're with me every day. You tell me what you've noticed." And that really opened my eyes.
As you mentioned there, people have blind spots, don't they?
We all do.
And so to experience a sense of vulnerability and to give permission to those around you to feed back enables you to potentially find those gaps or make clear those blind spots.
one of the things I so deeply appreciate about working for the Blue Jays was there was a formal end of season exercise that we did. And it went like this: Hey, Ben, pick three people in this organization that you'd like to give you feedback. And there were questions like, what do you think about Ben's ability to empower? What do you think about Ben's ability to collaborate? There were some questions associated with the larger values of the organization, and we all did that with each other. Dan, I keep that. I still go back to it, and I was able to go to major league staff, minor league staff, player development coaches, high performance staff members. To the goal was to get kind of a 360 uh, reflection, and then you were handed it, and if given an opportunity to grow, if you so choose.
How did that feedback make you feel?
In the moment, it felt great, but I'd also say it was great because it was thankfully some pretty good scores. However, let me say this: I'm the type of person that is seeking feedback almost every day.
How do you get that feedback?
Open-ended questions immediately after. So, for example, yesterday I was working with transitioning military veterans, and I did a group session with them. And at the end of that, I even at the beginning I told them, hey, before we conclude, I would love to get some feedback on the impact that today's work has had. And because I think there's a level of trust, I had one student say, I did not like that. I didn't get anything out of it. To me, that's a win because the environment it was created in which she could give negative, critical feedback. Most of the feedback was great. So I think modeling it is a way. Just what did you think about that? What's something you thought I could have done different or better there? 1 to 10, how much did that exchange meet expectations of what we talked about? All of those types of open-ended reflective approaches.
Just thinking about what you're sharing with us there is making me think of the importance of feedback on our capacity to understand ourselves, the self-awareness piece, understand what we're doing, our behaviors, and subsequently our performance, how it impacts others, if we're making a difference or not. And it's making me think of high performance environments and how in coaching, certainly at the very highest level with adult elite performance, so the professional level, but probably at other levels and age groups as well, that there's a real socialization into a hierarchical structure with coaches above players. And I don't know if I'm going to formulate a question here, but it would just be good to get your thoughts. Everything that you shared with us there, your experience with your consultancy with the military and getting negative feedback, and you're excited about that because it's going to help you improve, grow, learn. But everything about being a coach and that hierarchical structure can mean that we're scared as coaches to get feedback from our key stakeholders, who are our players essentially, because can I be seen to be getting feedback from players? Can I be seen to accept negative feedback from players? I've got to be all knowing, all seeing, all doing as a coach. As I said,
Mm-hmm.
no question, but it just makes me think of a real gap in the marketplace of self-awareness when it comes to sports coaches.
I I think we're aligned in that. There could be barriers
Mm.
that would get in the way of some of those vulnerable moments where a coach is having the confidence to lessen the control, lessen the grip, lessen the need to be seen as that all-knowing entity that you talked about, but no risk, no reward. And if players were to experience some openness to a coach like that, I'm just curious what that could do to levels of trust. It's nuanced for sure, and I also think about the other side of it. What I perceive to be the other side of it, Dan. Something that I'm really interested in helping coaches with is I love the John Wooden quote. Um, you haven't taught until they've learned. And what that makes me think about is when coaches are going in and offering feedback, and there could be loads of it in high performance sport, verbal feedback, video feedback, peer feedback. Uh, my good friend reminds me a wealth of information can create a poverty of attention. So, what's my point? How do we become experts in checking for understanding on the back of this process? I think when coaches have their mental model of how they want an exercise or a moment in the game to look like, how do they be as good with things like say back to me in your own words what we're going to do here. Hey, remind me again. Your cue to press is when what happens, and I've started to see some of the coaches that I'm working with are doing this in individual and group sessions, and we know that those types of moments can take away some of the extraneous aspects of the feedback and help deepen the learning.
What it's making me think is the link between self-awareness and a mastery environment, in as much as if I want to be aware of myself, I might have to start asking questions about how other people see me. That process of asking questions is also a prime feature of a mastery environment, I would say. You've
Mm-hmm.
talked about being autonomy supportive. Well, if I'm autonomy supportive, I'm probably going to be asking a lot of questions. You've worked in a number of high performance environments, and a mastery environment is something that is key to your consultancy practice. So can you explain to me some of the key features that you think exist within a mastery environment? Could you go a little bit broader than just the autonomy supportive? What else exists in that mastery environment? And you've also said, you talked about questions, checking for understanding. Fantastic. What else?
Well, the example that I'll give top of mind is is the Army Rangers. My first full-time job working in performance psychology was with the Army Rangers, and uh, so one would be overlearning, overlearning. It's not trained till you get it right. It's trained until you cannot get it wrong. It's the highest of stakes. There are no do-overs. One of the legends of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Colonel Ralph Puckett, said there's no prize for second place in the battle for the last 50 or 100 yards. I'll probably have a bunch of Rangers want to kill me because I maybe missed the last part. But it's high stakes. You train until you can't get it wrong. So I think that mastery level is making sure that with those guys that I worked with, there was absolute role clarity, 100% role clarity of this is what you're doing, and you're going to do this over and over and over. And I'm talking about watching guys train with blindfolds on. I'm watching guys train in daylight. I'm watching them train in darkness. um, they train in they train with real bullets. They do live fire exercises. And one of the things I learned from them is, even though this isn't true, it's bloody practice for a bloodless war. The conditions were demanding and they were tough, and what they focused on were the skills. They focused on the process. In and amidst all of that, it wasn't focusing on the outcome, because a lot of those outcomes and performance moments, those aren't on the calendar. You don't know which day the firefight is going to pop up. You don't know, exactly what's going to happen on deployment, but you train as if. And so, whether it would be watching those guys in shoot house exercises, and you would see senior members of the team standing up above, and immediately when it was over, they would go down and coach younger junior people on what just happened. So what are you getting? Immediate feedback, immediate, not delayed. Another quality of that environment, and I'm sure you've heard about it, is the after action review, the AAR, where after an event has occurred, a training event, a training exercise, everyone's going to huddle up, and they're going to review it, and they're going to talk about every aspect of it to make sure that learning took place. I know I'm hitting you with a ton of quotes today, but here comes another one. We don't learn from experience, we learn by reflecting on experience. So we have that whole what, so what, now what? What, we're going to practice clearing a room. So what? We made some mistakes. Now what? Here's what the mistakes were. Now we're going to do it again and again and again and again and again until we can't get it wrong. And I recently, at an event I was at, a different military operator said something we've all heard before, which is, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion. You'll fall back to your highest level of training. So 1 rep is not enough. 10 reps isn't enough. It's got to be repped over and over and over and over. And I think that's the coach transfer in this, is how do you know when it's done so well in training that it's going to hold up on Saturday or Sunday or game day? How do you know?
It's really interesting because as you were speaking there, listening to what you're saying, especially about the military, and relating that in my own mind to attitudes in high performance sport, because you said something interesting there about the military, that they're very much engaged in a mastery environment, and they would be because it is literally life and death, right? But what they don't by and large have in front of them is a fixture program. They don't know necessarily when they're going to have to use their skills. They're going into battle. And so there's not that kind of attitude when they're training daily. Well, we're going into battle next week. And I know that can exist. I get that in times of war. But we're going into battle next week, so we have to do this, this, and this. There's just a permanent fixture of a mastery environment. There's a permanent fixture of intensity where, as you're saying, you're overlearning. You're learning this stuff so much that you can do it blindfolded, that there's almost no chance of it going wrong off of your own back. There's obviously uncontrollables out there. But it's making me think of how in sport, that's almost a wonderful attitude, because I think about the teams I work with, the athletes I work with, and actually them adopting that approach. Hey, let's forget the fixture list. I know you can't completely do that because there's the nuance of who you're playing and what, to speak to your idea of role clarity, what your role might be in a game. I get that. But the point being is, if I forget my fixture list and I just see day to day, is I must be in that mastery environment. And that mastery environment, I think of Michael Jordan, I think of the late, great Kobe Bryant, and we could think of the Williams sisters as well, for instance, how they would always say, look, I play harder in training and my intensity is greater in order to be the best possible competitor I can be on game day.
Mm-hmm.
So a mastery environment for you, autonomy supportive,
Yeah.
a high intensity of training, engaging in learning, developing, improving every single day, in many respects, irrespective of what's going on around you, irrespective of the fixture list, irrespective of where we are on a league table. We're engaging in mastery every day, learning, improving, developing.
And if I had one thing, I mean, I've so many takeaways from my time getting to work with the Rangers. The other one that to me that just it was modeled by everyone. The standard that the 18-year-old had was the same for the 28 and the 38 and the 48. And Dan, that's why I mean it was a meritocracy. You know, that repeatability of it, the do it because that's our charter. This is why we train hard and how we train hard. I mean, it was modeled by everyone. You could not go into that environment and not want to get better. Just by being in that system, it it challenged you to raise your own game.
So there's some keen links here. By developing your self-awareness, and we're talking about coaches here, you engage in a process that potentially enables a mastery environment. There's lots of other things to it, but being self-aware as a coach, knowing your strengths, knowing your blind spots, getting 360-degree feedback can enable you to be the best coach that you can be, engage in your coaching craft, working in servitude of a mastery environment. And we're talking about the intensity of everyday training. And we're obviously specifically speaking to the adult elite level here, the professional level, the developing adult elite level. Because maybe at the participative level, if you're 10 years old, maybe that's all a little bit too much, but that's that's the population we're speaking to here. But I'm saying all of this because leading on to your third factor of resilience, and again, appreciating and respecting. Now, there are other factors at play, but you've given us a third factor of resilience. See, there's it interesting, isn't there? Because there's this juxtaposition between the human being in a high performance environment having to really stretch themselves, doing the things that we've spoken about there. Forget the fixture list, just intensity of training, learning, reflection, improving, developing. But we're human beings, and we, for me, in my opinion, and this might be an interesting conversation if you disagree, which would be absolutely fine, but we experience our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings. That doesn't mean we can't generate a thought. I'm not suggesting that. It doesn't mean we can't take charge and take control of our feelings and emotions. But we experience thoughts, emotions, and feelings. And I know that you're a keen proponent of ACT as a mental skills coach. ACT being a psychological framework, acceptance, commitment therapy that we've spoken about numerous times on the Sports Psych Show. And you must be utilizing those frameworks often, because if you're striving to promote that mastery environment with that kind of intensity, but also understanding that the human is the human and we experience these thoughts, emotions, feelings that aren't always helpful, that resilience piece must be an area that maybe you're getting involved more, or you're having more conversations about with a coach. And it must be an area where you're working hard with a coach to help that coach understand this and implement the things that helps him manage the mastery orientation, the mastery environment, and promote resilience as his players experience their thoughts, emotions, feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my kind of favorite way looking at resilience. Well, first and foremost, I think what Dr. Hayes has done with ACT and mindful valued living and psychological flexibility, I think all of those things are synonymous and in the resilience bucket. What I know about resilience, I think a lot of people, and I'm not I would not say I am an expert on this at any means, but I do study it and I do coach it. Uh, it's a process and an outcome. And where I think it can get tricky is to think that it's an outcome only and that it has to happen following some adverse experiences. It's a process too, and it's a multidimensional process. Resilience is a mental, emotional, social, and physical process, which is why it's talked about so much in sport, because sport is physical, social, emotional, and mental. And if we're only coaching one aspect of that, i.e., the physical aspect, then we're missing out on a way to build a robust player in this process. Very quickly, before I touch on ACT, one of the, for me, greatest resilience factors that I witnessed working with the Army Rangers was the whole system itself promoted resilience. Let me tell you what I mean. Things like every morning before they started their workday, every single Army Ranger stands up and at the top of their lungs together, they recite the Ranger Creed, which starts with recognizing that I volunteered as a Ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession, which means right away, there is an acceptance factor that in doing this, I'm signing on for both the positive and the negative consequences of my chosen pathway. We don't ever think about that in sport when until things like loss, getting released, not being picked for the team, injury, career being over. Those are times where the hazards of the chosen profession will rear their ugly head. For me, so far, ACT has been a wonderful framework in helping performers in these moments regain their psychological or come to their psychological and emotional flexibility. All of the things that you've mentioned on the show before, helping people make contact with the present moment because they've suffered an injury and now the story they're telling themselves is I won't make it back, or 50 other things that their mind could dominate with, helping them really get grounded in the present moment using some mindful techniques. With the MLS team that I work with, we do something called mental activation, which is very mindful heavy. It's on game day, it's 2 hours minus kickoff. It's connecting the breath, it's down regulating, and it's allowing some of those strengths that we talked about earlier, that strengths based approach. It's allowing them to tap in to those strengths. Adverse moments, you know, untrained, we're probably more likely to be feelings focused. However, with ACT, in my opinion, we can shift to a task focus, which I know you and I are united, and that's maybe one of the best ways to get the most out of your performance. It's practicing acceptance, like you've talked about, that the full range of emotions are part of the human experience. And if we're waiting around to feel good, we may not ever get to have our best performances. I like to ask players all the time, because so much of sport is tied to confidence. And, I'll ask them, hey, have you ever woken up one morning and knew you were going to boss it? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I have. And then did it not go well in the game? Oh, yeah, that's happened. And what about the inverse when you've woken up unsure, uncertain, maybe fused or stuck on some thoughts that it wasn't going to be your day, but you ended up having a wonderful performance, one that you'd love to repeat. So, what's that tell us? And I think that's the cognitive diffusion, thoughts aren't facts piece in helping people, as Dr. Hayes talks about, become experts not at the content of their thoughts, but the relationship with their thoughts. And I think if I were to focus in, that's a big area of interest and exploration for me, is helping people understand the relationship with their thoughts. Are they hooked, stuck, dominated, owned, and fused, or are they able to notice and step back quickly back onto what they came there to do? And I know we don't have to go into all the elements, but as I think back to having a do-over in my own coaching experience, Dan, had I had that framework from the very beginning, Ben, do you know how to get present? Ben, can you accept a defeat and quickly move on to planning for the next day? Ben, do you know who you are when you're not coaching? Those types of things, the values piece, the committed action piece, I can only imagine. And for if there's other sports psych listening on the show, if I had a doctoral dissertation review, I would want to study the impact that ACT could have on coaches at elite levels.
There's so much to unpack there. I want to be respectful of your time, but one thing I do want to hone in on is that word acceptance, because it feels like from everything that you've said there, that acceptance is such an important player in your work with athletes. Going back to the Rangers, the military that you work with, and their mantra that there's a shared mental model. There appears to be a shared mental model of acceptance, or at least promoting acceptance, that this is going to be, I've signed up to this, and there will be moments that I love, but there's also going to be moments that are tough, that are hard, that are difficult. And it's making me think, whilst it might be unrealistic to think of, I don't know, let's pick a random soccer team, football team, Tottenham Hotspur, who perhaps have a reputation for being, for lacking a bit of resilience historically. And there's even a name for it now. It's being Spursy. So Spurs could be less Spursy, as in conceding a goal towards the end of the game because they're not seeing the game out. They're not very resilient. It would be unrealistic to suggest that they would stand up every single day at the beginning of every day or before training and recite a mantra across the team.
Right.
But there's an element of truth to that, or wanting that, because you do want every single player engaged in this notion of acceptance, that this is great, and I love what I do, and I'm here because I love what I do. But also, this is going to be tough. This is going to be hard. The commitment to the process, to the task, cannot happen without the acceptance of the challenge. Would that be something that really is front and center of your message to athletes?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've shared that Army Ranger story with them, which I think in the moment, I even have, in some instances, observed some psychological flexibility from the athlete in that moment when they do step back and take some perspective and say, yeah, these are the hazards of my chosen profession.
Mm-hmm.
And which I think can lessen the ruminating and the dwelling and get back to, this is what I'm here to do. This is the committed action piece. I can do something about this.
Mm-hmm. And then the commitment piece is very much underpinned by action. Would you say that it's an acceptance that you're going to experience certain thoughts, but it's committing to the kind of actions that you need to engage in without being skewed by the thoughts that you're experiencing?
I'd say 3 words for me that are closely associated with committed action would be goals, values, and covert. And here's what I mean. First, are my actions aligned with my goals and values? If I did 10 things today, what are they in service of? And then the covert piece. What do I mean by that? A misread that I had on ACT early on was that committed action was the overt behaviors. I'll go to the gym. I will have a great lifting session. I'll stay after and get extra fitness in. I will modify the diet, and all of these would be overt, observed behaviors. Committed action involves a covert piece where I also commit to staying in the present moment. And I also commit to being able to step back and notice my thoughts as opposed to treating them as orders, and being a slave to them. And so that's something that I think has to be said about anybody who's wants to or is using this framework, is that committed action is both an internal and external process. And you really can get to that deepest level of psychological flexibility when committed to both. That's why in the hexaflex drawing of it, all of those core processes are connected to one another. It's not linear. We may be getting too nerdy right now. I apologize.
No. We can get as nerdy as we want to. But let's close things out here. 3 really important processes that you've spoken about that are vital for any kind of coaching practice, coaching environment. Self-awareness, establishing a mastery environment, developing resilience, perhaps for yourself as a coach and for your players. Let's close on your best possible golden nugget. So putting you slightly on the spot, your best possible golden nugget with relation to those 3. And look, it might be something that you reinforce from what you've said earlier. Absolutely fine. But if there is one, let's hone in on one takeaway across self-awareness, mastery environment, resilience, that you feel is imperative for those listening in, and respecting individual differences as well. So it's a bit of an impossible question. But what would that golden nugget be?
Golden nugget, Dan, and if we were on together for 5 days in a row, it'd probably be different every day.
Yeah,
so don't hold me to it. But it would have to be, I think it was Peter Senge. I could be wrong on the author, but the quote is, learning is the only sustainable competitive advantage.
Yep.
And it's just continue to learn, look, listen, read, ask, study. I don't know anybody, who ever regrets really knowing too much. And so I would like, that's what's showing up for me right now. In addition to, yeah.
And excuse the interjection, because you've suddenly got me very excited there. So I'll try and respectfully close things out in a second, but I just want to respond to that, because this is so relevant for me, because I found myself just at the time of recording, especially the last few days of last week, having so many conversations with my clients around this, actually. So it's really interesting that you've said that, because I just don't think enough athletes, competitors, ambitious competitors, make learning their competitive advantage, if that makes sense. And perhaps, respectfully, not enough coaches are passionate about the intricacies of learning, which you mentioned a few earlier, like checking for understanding or testing for understanding, or considering somebody's working memory, for example, all the granular detail, the intricacies around learning, some things that we've covered regularly on the Sports Psych Show. Just having that passion for learning to make it a competitive advantage, I wonder, and as a hypothesis, that is one way to close the gap between the vast majority of competitors who are at least have modest ability or moderate talent, if I'm allowed to use that word of talent, because I know it's lots of people don't like that word, as compared to those who have real serious ability, real serious talent, who, a golfer who picks up a golf club and finds himself at scratch in a year or two, somebody who's just really good at football, soccer, somebody who's just really athletic on the
Right.
basketball court and just really good and has that natural affinity. Let's get out of that world and that says, oh, well, that doesn't exist. Of course it exists. But to close that gap, yes, mental skills on game day, really important. And I'm always going to be a passionate advocate for that. But more and more, 18, 19 years into doing this, 28 years in high performance sport, even now I keep every day reminding myself, no, I think that learning piece, I'm becoming more of an advocate of that being the way for ambitious young competitors to close the skills gap. There is the learning piece. Any thoughts on that? He's just given me a thumbs up. Ben's given me a thumbs up there. I'll take that. All right, Ben. Brilliant. Really, really interesting conversation. And I can't thank you enough for your time there. Hey, look, I know that so much of what you've said will have sparked the interest of all those listening in. So how can people find you, follow you, and get in contact?
Sure. My company name is Ready.Set.Resilient. My website is rsrcoaching.com. And people can reach out to me at Ben C. Freakley, Freakley, at gmail.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great being with you today.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Site Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.